I never questioned my vote. It was never regretted my vote. It seemed pretty clear that he was trying to disrupt the counting of the electoral votes. You read the indictment, and there's person after person from his campaign to others that said, you lost, it's over. There's no evidence that's there. So it's pretty clear that reading the indictment that, in fact, he did know, but he continued the big lie.
Hi, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Jacqueline Alemany, the congressional investigations reporter here at the Washington Post. And our guest today is former Republican Michigan Congressman Fred Upton. Welcome back to Washington Post Live, Congressman.
It's still Fred, Jackie. Nice to see you.
I needed permission for you to tell me to call you Fred. Well, let's get right to the news. Donald Trump was indicted for a third time last week, this time on charges that he tried to subvert the results of the 2020 election. You said this indictment was, quote, totally justified the vote I cast, meaning your vote to impeach Mr. Trump for those actions. Why do you feel vindicated?
Well, we saw it firsthand. I mean, those of us that were there in the Capitol that day, and talking to the officers afterward, watching them, casting a vote at 8 o'clock or so when the House came back after we had adjourned because of all the insurrectionists that were there. But the bottom line was, he really did try to discount or not allow the counting of the electoral votes on January 6th. We see the conspiracy charges with the fake electors. I have every reason to believe that was directed by someone within his administration. I've read the indictment that came out this last week. Don't know how fast the trial is going to proceed and different charges that are going on, but absolutely, every one of us that cast that vote, all 10 of us, saw the same thing. And you got to remember, too, right after January 6th, the president said in his own words, I did everything totally appropriate. I don't know if he'd say the same thing today, but that was one of the bottom lines why I voted to impeach him back then.
So I'm not sure he said that what he did was totally appropriate, but at a dinner last Friday in Alabama, Trump said, quote, anytime they file an indictment, we go way up in the polls. That is a slight exaggeration, but we've all seen his poll numbers go up since he announced he was running for president, and those three indictments subsequently have been released, and his core support never wavers, no matter the legal proceedings against him. How do you explain this ironclad support from his base?
Well, he's portrayed himself as the victim. I'm on his email list. In fact, today I already got this morning on my email, new poll shows President Trump with a massive lead in New Hampshire. He's at 43, DeSantis now in single digits, Christie tied for second at 9, Haley at 7, Scott at 5, Pence down at 3. But yeah, his numbers get stronger with every one of these indictments. And I suspect if there's another one this week in Georgia, and it sounds like there is based on the security that's going around the courthouse, his numbers stay solid. He has done a masterful job at making sure that his base is there. They're someone might say armed and ready, but they're ready. And so far, it's not weakened them at all.
Yeah, and when Trump was indicted this past spring, that first indictment that came down in New York, almost all of his GOP rivals reacted with outrage against the prosecutors. This messaging actually owned on your old stomping grounds, as we've seen the House GOP make their oversight efforts largely hinged on defending the former president, saying that the Biden administration has been weaponized against him. There have been some candidates, people like Chris Christie, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, and even in recent days, former Vice President Mike Pence, who have thrown some criticisms his way. But do you think that the tide will turn overall and that fellow Republicans will be emboldened to criticize Trump, or do you think that basically until the primary, they're all going to toe the line here?
I think the ones that are in the race are going to stay with the talking points that they've said so far. I don't think they're going to flip back one way or another. I watched Chris Christie last night on CNN. I thought he did a fantastic job, particularly coming back from Ukraine as he was there just a week or so ago. And it's one of the reasons. I mean, you see what Chris Christie says. We have this upcoming Republican debate on the 23rd. My sense is that Trump will say, "I've got this huge double-digit lead over all these folks." I think that he'll be afraid to take the hit from Chris Christie and others that might be armed, ready to go after him. And so he'll avoid that debate, knowing that he can, his view is if he just sits it out, he'll keep this double digit lead with the primaries only a few months away. He's identified, this is Trump, more than 100,000 Trump supporters in Iowa. Now, you got to remember back in 2016, Trump didn't win the Iowa caucus, but he's done a masterful job at identifying these folks. I suspect that they're going to turn out, and with 12 folks in the race, which is there were 17 people in the race back in 2016. He's in pretty solid grounds to win the nomination as the clock just continues to tick, and he's not made any stumbles as it relates to his base.
But what are voters supposed to make of someone like Chris Christie? This is someone who was one of the first people to get behind Trump in 2016, someone who worked on his presidential transition team and really only started speaking out against him after January 6th. Why are voters supposed to trust Chris Christie now?
Well, Chris's problem is, and I know I'm talking to say Chris, is that there are too many people in the field. And that's how Trump won the first time. 17 people in the field. He had a base of about 30%. The dominoes fell his way, and he became the nominee and ultimately the winner of the November election. When more Republican candidates got in over the last 6 or 8 months, I mean, the mayor of Miami, et cetera, it only helps him. Remember that South Carolina is an early state now in the Republican primary. Well, it's for both, with two candidates, Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, both from solid folks in South Carolina. It only helps Trump in that race as it divides the base in opposition to him, knowing that he's going to keep his own base. And people see these poll numbers, and man, you see him every day. I'm getting something from the Trump campaign. He's winning 60 points in Tennessee, New Hampshire. I mean, Michigan, all these states. He's got the endorsements, and he's on a roll to make sure that he captures that nomination, knowing that there are so many people in the race.
And there's another governor who's also changed his tune in the past few days. That's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who finally acknowledged that Trump did, in fact, lose the 2020 election. Do you think that this is a trend that will continue? And what do you think the winning message is here on the 2020 election, as Trump is going to continue to litigate that as he's brought to court?
Well, for DeSantis, it almost is, and he's had a struggling campaign. Let's face it, he fired his campaign manager a little bit earlier this morning. They've had big staff layoffs. No one's seen any real traction from him in the last 4 or 5 months. But for him, it's, as you look at the Republican voters, if Trump wasn't in the race, he'd be a runaway. But I think the base voter, particularly the Trump voter, says, if you can have the real thing in Trump, why should you have something like DeSantis? And that, particularly with the hits that DeSantis endured. I mean, the ads that we saw even here in Michigan, how he voted against Social Security and raising taxes, and his issue in Ukraine obviously got a lot of play that poisoned the well for a number of folks that care about that issue. But I don't think he'll go farther than he will, because let's face it, for a lot of these candidates that are there, if for some reason Trump does fall apart, which is hard to fathom, but if he does, whoever emerges wants to make sure that they can capture that base, particularly if Trump didn't run as an independent or something like that. So they're very hesitant to attack in a major way a front runner with the lead that he has.
So, in the case that Trump does fall apart, some GOP candidates have floated the idea of pardoning him. You've said that that idea is insulting. Why?
Yeah, I look. I was there on January 6th. We've heard him over and over. I mean, this is year 3 since the election. He has yet to recant. He has yet to say he made a mistake. He continues to say that the election was stolen. The evidence that will be presented from the grand jury, and of course, we'll all see that in the months ahead, make it pretty clear that there, in my view, that there was a conspiracy. That this is not a freedom of speech issue. That they actually directed the Department of Justice, his top aides, and others to interfere with the states. He continues to be on that same page. And I think that it would be wrong. I think that it would be wrong to give him a pardon, knowing that it's. I don't want to compare this to baseball, but Pete Rose, he never acknowledged that he was betting on games, and for Trump, he's never admitted that he's lost 3 years later, and he's seen a lot of folks. I mean, we saw deaths at the U.S. Capitol. For our history, we've been proud of having a peaceful transition of power that he tried to directly involve himself and disrupt back on January 6th. So I'm not in favor of pardon, and I would hope that whoever, however this breaks, and that doesn't become a big issue. Doesn't happen.
What about the argument that we've heard about sort of this idea that a pardon would be helpful for healing the country? I mean, it's not often in democracies. I mean, I think we see this obviously in dictatorships where a former president is behind bars.
Well, this is 3 years later. I don't know that we'll see how the juries move. It's going to be a long time between if there is a conviction and the appeals that take place. For those that were trying to suggest that Trump would be in jail behind bars for the November election, I mean that's not going to happen. There's a long process, a judicial process here, and ultimately we'll watch closely what happens. But who knows if he would actually, if he's convicted, if he'd actually get a jail term versus some substantial fine or a major reprimand. I mean, that's a way down the road.
I want to get to a viewer question we have from Calvin Hamilton in California. And he asks, what do you tell people who say that this is a witch hunt or politically motivated?
I think, look, I was there on January 6th. I mean, the evidence has come in. You'll recall that a good number of folks, whether they be in the administration or aides, didn't want to testify. They made it very difficult for the process to move forward. And even at this point, you've got the Trump team asking for delays, not wanting it to come. So, but at some point, you got to pay the piper. I mean, justice has to be served. And based on the evidence, hey, we'll see what happens. No one's above the law.
And I want to talk a little bit about the future of the GOP. You served in Congress for 36 years as a proud Republican. Do you still consider yourself a Republican?
Oh, absolutely. I got my start a long time ago. 36 years in the House. I worked for the Reagan administration at the White House for 4.5 years. Before that, I worked for our local congressman here in Southwest Michigan. Yes, I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm a governing Republican. I know that I learned Reagan's principles way back when, and he had, of course, a Democratic Congress that he worked with, but he got things done. And at the end of the day, when he ran for re-election, he won 49 states, losing only Mondale's Minnesota, his opponent. But he was a standout for civility, for decency. People loved him on both sides of the aisle. We were going through some tough times back then too. I mean, the fall of the Berlin Wall, inflation, the economy. You always have huge issues of the day, but he's the model that I followed, and absolutely, I'm still a Republican. I contribute to the Republicans. I'm involved in a good number of different things, not only here in Michigan, but around the country as well. And I'm also a proud, I've been working with No Labels, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, where we're actually trying to encourage a Republican and a Democrat to run as a team, and particularly if it's Biden and Trump, and allow the voters to make a decision if they want really a third choice based on the track record of the two that have been in office.
I have many questions about your involvement with No Labels, but first, in the event of a Biden-Trump matchup in the general election, who are you voting for?
Well, I'm hoping, if that's what it is, I'm hoping that No Labels will get on all 50 states' ballots. We're on a number of them already. We're in play in nearly 24 others. We're going to have a national convention in Dallas in April of next year. But I'd like to think that if it is Biden and Trump, that No Labels will be successful in getting on all 50 states, and we'll have a Republican and a Democrat, who knows in what order, that I could support and be able to vote for that in November next year.
And what if No Labels isn't successful in that?
You're putting me in the corner. I think that we will be. I really do. I mean, we're on, we got on, we're on more than half a dozen ballots now, and we're proceeding. I'm watching this very closely. I think that it's going to happen. Particularly if it's Biden and Trump.
We'll return to that question, but
Yeah, right.
in terms of third-party candidates, there isn't one that has won an electoral vote since 1968. Why do you think this time is going to be different?
Well, the polling actually shows that nearly 70% of American voters are ready for a third party candidate, particularly if it's a rematch of Biden and Trump. We've seen this really for the last number of months. No Labels has polled more than 50,000 households, particularly in key states like Michigan, and the voters want a choice. And back in '92, Perot actually got nearly 20% of the vote. He got on all 50 states ballots. And I think the same thing can happen here, particularly if it's a rematch between the two. And there's a good chance that if it's an appealing ticket, people like bipartisanship. They're tired of I'll say it, the crap that's going on over the last number of years, the insults, the inability to get things done, the failure to get a budget, the failure to deal with major issues like immigration and crime and a whole number of different things, and looking for a new approach. And I think, frankly, that if we're able to get on these states' ballots, that we'll see a team that will reach out on their own and be able to make a real difference. And who knows what'll happen? We got a long ways to go.
West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and former Utah Governor Republican John Huntsman have recently attended a No Labels event in New Hampshire in the past few weeks. Are these the two men that your choice is going to be for the No Labels bipartisan ticket?
I was there in New Hampshire for their town meeting. They actually did two. One was televised, one was not. But it was really for the launch of this booklet called Common Sense, where I'm trying to aim it right in the camera, but I'm missing here big time, I guess, in front of myself. But it's commonsense.org. People can get a copy online and see it. It's about 50 pages of where we stand, where we think that issues that we ought to deal with, including Social Security versus ignoring the problem. And it was in Manchester, New Hampshire, and they both did a really good job. Now, to your question, are these the two? Not necessarily. I would say that there's probably a good laundry list. My name, by the way, is not on it, nor should it be. But there's probably a good 10 or 12 folks on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, that I think would welcome many of the issues that we cite here in terms of how they would like to proceed. And, it'll be a very transparent process, and we'll figure out how this all lays out. But they both did a really good job. I had forgotten that Judd Huntsman had run for president back in 12. He was terrific. Of course, I knew Joe Manchin when I served in the House. He was very active with No Labels, but we did a lot of things together. We worked on the infrastructure bill, which President Biden signed into law. We worked on the CHIPS bill. He was a leader in terms of avoiding this debt ceiling crisis that we had back a month or so ago. So, we'll see how this all plays out. But they did both a very good job. And I suspect that you'll see a number of these well publicized events in different states, probably with different people, Republicans and Democrats, talking about the need for bipartisanship, for civility, for working together in addressing the nation's problems that, frankly, we can't afford to kick down the road in further years.
So you're not sure yet who your choice of a
No, we
ticket would
don't.
be?
There's not a top choice here at this point. I think you'll see a process, an interview process. We're not gonna be able to have primaries in every state, but we are gonna have that national convention in Dallas that would ratify a team if, in fact, it looks like it would be Biden and Trump in terms of a rematch. We also have until really mid to late summer next year to decide to pull back, so that we, if for some reason it's not Biden and Trump, for some reason, whatever it is, we have a good number of months before we actually would decide to push for a ticket that, of course, those candidates would run themselves.
So on that topic of pulling back, there have been a slate of polls: NBC, CNN, Cook Political Report, 538, and even the lone poll that has been commissioned by No Labels that have showed that a third party candidate benefits Donald Trump and moves the race from very close against Biden to a slight Trump advantage. Is, what do you have to say about this argument and the potential that this effort is going to help Trump win?
Well, a couple things. First of all, we have a long time. Second, and you know me a little bit, Jackie, the last thing that I think well, I won't say you because you're, the last thing that I would want to do is to have this effort reelect Trump. I cast a vote to impeach him. I would not want to be part of any effort that would see him reelected in terms of a rematch, which is why I'm working so hard on No Labels and really allow the voters to have a choice, have a third choice, if in fact that's exactly what it is. Now, if you look at some of the polls, and I've seen a lot of them over the since March. I think Rasmussen has had Trump beating Biden since June. You look at the electoral vote count. You look at the stuff that I get every day from the Trump team on my own internet, my own website. You think that he's running away with it. So it's going to be a very interesting year, that's for sure, as we look ahead. But the bottom line is, let's let the voters have a choice and let them decide what their ballot will look like come November of next year, if in fact it's tried Biden and Trump.
So what's your red line then? If you don't want to be part of an effort that helps reelect Trump, will No Labels pledge to abort their effort to
Yeah, I
put up
think
a
that there's
party
been
candidate?
yeah, I think there's been some statements from the No Labels folks saying that if they saw that this was an effort to give Trump a victory and outside of the margin of error, that at the end of the day we would pull back and not see a ticket go forward. So we really have until July or August next year to see how things all shape out. Let alone see the candidates raise the money that they would have to raise to be able to compete in a fair way come November.
Okay, and I'll try this once more now. In the case that
Yeah,
No Labels does pull back, it's Biden Trump. Are you voting for Biden or for Trump?
I don't want to say yet. I don't. Ask me, have me on another time.
And I'm wondering, when we're talking about middle ground and why part of the rationale for why you support no labels and this return to civility. What is the middle ground on these hot button issues of abortion, climate change, civil rights?
Well, we got to, we got to deal with them. We saw uh, real, real gridlock in the last couple weeks, at least in the House. We'll see how things all shape out up with the National Defense Bill. We saw, one of the things we've been pushing for. One of the things in our publication is the Congress needs to pass a budget every year. Uh, early part of this year, the Freedom Caucus demanded of the Speaker, and he agreed that they would take up all 12 separate appropriation bills in the House. Well, as it turned out, here we are. Really, it's September. It's Labor Day. Congress doesn't come back to like the September 10th or so. They passed one in the House. They passed none in the Senate. They didn't even do a budget resolution in the House or the Senate. And we're going to be 3 weeks away. 12 legislative days is all it is in September before the end of the fiscal year. And so not only do they have each one of the appropriation bills, and remember the Freedom Caucus said, we're not doing a continuing resolution. Don't look at us for the votes. And by the way, they're going to have an automatic sequester on top of that. So you got the FAA reauthorization that needs to happen. You got the farm bill that expires the end of September. You've got just normal things. News today is that they're talking a little bit about an impeachment inquiry that may be not only for some cabinet members, but also for the president. Look to see how that might tie things down in terms of not being able to get things done. I mean, this is really one of the most ineffective Congresses that we've ever seen before, and based on their track record so far, they've not gotten anything done in terms of the budget process as it relates to the appropriation bills. No clue as to how this thing is going to up.
Well, that does seem to be the trend in the House. I'm wondering, more out of my curiosity as someone who watches the House and covers them very closely, how the institution has changed since you were there 36 years ago.
Well, in the beginning, when I was first elected, we did take up all the appropriation bills on the House floor. We'd spend maybe a week on the labor HHS bill. And you'd have, germane amendments could be offered. If you raise spending, you had to have an offset in terms of a cut. And most of the bills, as I recall, passed on a pretty good bipartisan vote, whether it be for veterans or the military or agriculture, all of those. The last number of years, we've ended up with a CR. We had a couple of shutdowns in the 90s. We have a real fiscal cliff that's emerging now come September because the differences between the House and the Senate are so great. But it's I don't know how they were allowed to go home for the August recess without getting their work done. I mean, remember going back to January, all the votes that Kevin, I think they had 15 ballots before he was ultimately elected speaker. It took about 2 weeks. And lots of promises were made. Many of them were on the fiscal side. We're going to do all 12 bills. We're not going to do a CR. We're going to work together. So here we are. Let's face it, September, worst track record ever. Where are they in terms of trying to get these bills done? In fact, the last week that the House was in session, they were supposed to do the agriculture appropriation bill as well, relatively easy one traditionally, and they didn't have the votes to even get the rule passed, the procedure to bring it to the House floor to allow for debate, amendments, and passage. And they just pulled the plug and said, go home. We'll see you in September. Not a good track record as you look back at this year. They did, to their credit, we did avoid the debt ceiling crisis by literally just a couple of votes. But man, that took forever and a day as well.
And Fred, I want to ask you one more question before we run out of time. But who do you consider to be the leader of today's Republican Party?
Well, you really have to look at the Speaker, Kevin. I mean, he's the highest ranking Republican, and I think you really have to look at Mitch McConnell. We're sad to see his issue 2 weeks ago or so, but they're really the two leaders, and let's hope that they can work together and be on the same page when they come back, because we got, hey, this is a wonderful country, and we got to work together to get things done. And when you have divided government, and we do, and we're going to have it after this November election as well, nobody's going to have 60 votes in the Senate, and the House and Senate are pretty well divided as well. The only way you get things done is you work together, and somehow you got to see that hand of peace between the R's and the D's, the House and the Senate, and work with the administration as we confront all these issues, whether it be China or Russia, obviously our own economy, pocketbook issues, things with the environment. Climate change is real. Look at this summer. It's the only way to get things done, and somehow we have to get back to that page, and maybe take a chapter or two out of the Reagan playbook to see how it ought to work.
And on that depressing note, we are unfortunately all out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today, Congressman Upton. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jackie.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head to WashingtonPostLive.com for more information about all of our upcoming programs. I'm Jacqueline Alemany, and again, thanks so much for watching us today.